Hello, I am Alon Burstein, a visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and an Israel Institute fellow at the University of California, Irvine, here bringing you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas war. It is currently the evening of January 25th, 2024 in the United States, the morning of January 26th, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, many conflicting statements and reports came out throughout the day regarding different leaks and information from different sources about whether the hostage negotiations are advancing, what has been agreed upon, or what hasn't been agreed upon. Conflicting statements came out of Hamas representatives in Lebanon. Osama Hamdan, who is the official Hamas representative in Lebanon, stated that Hamas, I'm quoting, is taking the negotiation offer seriously with regards to stopping the attacks. Hamas will release its captives if the Israeli enemy releases our prisoners. He added that Hamas will also abide by any ceasefire requirement issued by the ICJ. According to what Osama Hamdan is saying, Hamas is looking at the agreement of a truce and at the idea of hostage exchange, not necessarily waiting for an all-out demand for a ceasefire. In turn, Ahmed Abdel Hadi, who is another Hamas representative in Lebanon, stated to the Saudi Al Arabiya network that, again I'm quoting, Israel's proposals for a temporary truce in exchange for a hostage deal does not meet our basic requirements to stop the war in Gaza and a complete idea of withdrawal from the Gaza Strip as a basic condition to resume negotiations. He added that Hamas will be willing to return to negotiations, again quoting, if there is a complete offer that leads to cessation of attacks after receiving assurances from negotiators that attacks do not return. There is still no deal, and we will not give up the card of hostages in exchange for temporary truces that will expire after the Israeli side gets its demands. And importantly, Ahmed Abdel Hadi also added praises at the end of his statements to Yahya Sinwar in the Gaza Strip. This may be related to the ongoing strife that we're hearing about between the leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, who resides in Qatar, and in general the external leadership, Ismail Haniyeh, Khalid Mashal, and others, and Yahya Sinwar, and Mohammed Def, who are in the Gaza Strip. Possibly there are different messages from the different leaders leading to these conflicting messages as well. In turn, different news outlets in Israel also reported conflicting reports regarding the ongoing negotiations. The Israeli Haaretz newspaper, contrary to other sources, stated that sources close to the negotiations reported to Haaretz that Israel and Hamas have agreed in principle on most terms of the agreement. According to this source, the truce will last 35 days, during which time all hostages that are held in the Gaza Strip will be released, and Israel will in turn release Palestinian prisoners and allow a free entry of humanitarian aid. According to this source, the formula of exchange between hostages and Palestinian prisoners, i.e. how many Palestinian prisoners will be released for each hostage, has already been agreed upon, and the point of contention remains whether the deal will include an absolute ceasefire as Hamas demands, or if it will not. Contrary to this, other reports in Israel's Channel 12 stated that the negotiations are quite stalled, that Hamas is demanding a 10 to 14 day truce before any hostage release, then a month and a half to 2 months of a truce, during which time hostages will be released in different stages, with the formula being 100 Palestinian prisoners that are released for every hostage. According to reports, Israeli officials responded to this, stating we will be generous, but not allow an emptying of the prisons. The bone of contention remains whether or not the war will end. Regarding the political establishment in Israel, the leader of the Shas party and member of government, Aryeh Deri, stated that with regards to future hostage deals, that Shas will object to any decision that requires us to stop the war and pull out of the Gaza Strip, specifically pulling all IDF forces out and letting Hamas continue to rule there. The war cabinet in Israel is reportedly going to meet tonight to discuss these negotiations, and the expanded cabinet is going to meet later as well. Possibly the most important news item relating to the hostage situation came from the Washington Post today that stated that CIA Director William Barnes is going to arrive in Europe next week, and he's going to meet with the head of the Mossad, Dedi Barnea, the head of Egyptian intelligence, Abbas Kamel, and Qatari Prime Minister Mohammed Athani. The report suggested that the sides are negotiating a 2-month truce, but again, the point of contention is a complete ceasefire. The reason this meeting is very important is because the last time that a truce was negotiated, we went through the same types of leaks, different sides saying different things, only when there was a meeting between these four parties, the head of the CIA, the head of the Mossad, the Qatari Prime Minister, and Abbas Kamel of the Egyptian intelligence. Only then was a truce agreed upon. The fact that that meeting is scheduled to happen next week does indicate that possibly there are developments and the sides are expected to reach some sort of conclusion, maybe already next week. Moving on to what's going on in the Gaza Strip. After 4 days of no rocket launchers, there were 2 barrages of rockets sent from the Gaza Strip targeting southern parts of Israel in the last 24 hours. These targeted the areas surrounding Gaza, specifically Netiv HaSara and Nachal Oz. Regarding the fighting in the Gaza Strip, there were reports in Beit Hanun, in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, of battles that occurred in the area. In addition, the Palestinian Health Ministry reported of an airstrike that occurred in Kuwait Square of Gaza City, in an area where Palestinians were gathering in order to expect a truck delivery of aid. According to reports, 20 Palestinians were killed and over 150 wounded. This report was not mentioned anywhere else. However, Al Jazeera did state that the IDF has announced it is going to investigate the matter. This was not stated in Israel or by the IDF, but Al Jazeera did make that claim. Moving on to the central parts of the Gaza Strip, the IDF reported carrying out several different raids throughout the central parts of the Gaza Strip. Did not exactly say where. However, again, Al Jazeera reported intensive bombings in the Al-Nuseirat refugee camp, so likely that is where most of the bombings were. In Al-Maghazi refugee camp, the Al-Quds brigades, that is the military wing of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, reported firing on IDF soldiers and vehicles near the camp, hitting some with mortars as well. Moving on to the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, in Khan Yunis, the IDF is continuously expanding its operation. Substantial IDF forces were reported in the El Amal neighborhood, while others are continuing to encircle the different refugee camps. Operations proceeding slowly according to reports due to the many civilians in the area. There are also a lot of footage coming out showing civilians walking among the soldiers and among the tanks. Substantial gun battles are reported in the different structures as the IDF is moving house by house and building by building. The IDF reportedly raided a compound and uncovered substantial weaponry. In different operations in the heart of the city, the IDF also raided an intelligence command center of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, as well as a Hamas command center, discovering substantial intelligence information and weapons cache. The Al-Quds brigades reported that they fired mortars on IDF tanks throughout Khan Yunis and identified several soldiers that were injured. Other news related to the Gaza Strip, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant visited military units today and largely echoed statements that he had made yesterday. He stated, and I quote, "Hamas has no reserves, has nowhere to bring weapons or ammunition from. It is busy fleeing. When a Hamas force meets IDF forces, the result is clear. Whoever does not understand this should go to Al-Shati refugee camp, Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun, Jabalia refugee camp. These are all areas of the north that were largely destroyed. Everywhere you, i.e. the IDF, has been. And they understand it today in Khan Yunis as well as in western Khan Yunis. People are lining up to come out of the tunnels and surrender by the thousands. These statements were made amidst photos that were released today of dozens of different people who were arrested in Khan Yunis by the different IDF forces. Reportedly, these are all Hamas operatives. Other news, the Wall Street Journal reported of continued concerns in the U.S. administration of Israeli flattening operations that are seemingly showing the IDF's intent to take over an area on the Gazan side of the border between Gaza and Israel as a future buffer zone. The report added that this will make it very complicated to convince Arab countries to participate in Gaza rebuilding and that this could be considered a war crime. The IDF is still continuing these flattening operations around many areas of the Gaza Strip, reportedly taking out buildings and detonating them or flattening them with different engineering units after it is confirmed that they were used for the purposes of terrorism. Other news, the Al-Qassam brigades, that is the military wing of Hamas, released a statement today summarizing its attacks from the last week. According to the Al-Qassam brigades, it carried out attacks against 68 IDF vehicles that were destroyed, killed 53 IDF soldiers, 57 military operations were carried out, including explosions and mortar fire. The Al-Qassam brigades detonated 4 homes used by the IDF in the Gaza Strip, downed 2 IDF drones, and engaged the IDF in face-to-face combat throughout the Gaza Strip. I will add that these numbers do not match up to the IDF numbers, specifically the number of soldiers killed or the number of vehicles that were destroyed. There was no report made today regarding casualties of the IDF. The number of IDF soldiers that were killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began remains 221, and the number of soldiers that have been injured in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began remains between 1,200 and 1,500. The Palestinian Health Ministry reported that 200 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of Palestinians that were killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 25,900. 64,110 Palestinians are reported injured. Moving on to the humanitarian situation relating to the attack that occurred yesterday in an UNRWA facility in which 13 Palestinians were killed and 75 were wounded, the IDF stated that it carried out an investigation showing that this attack was not the result of long-range attacks, i.e. aerial bombings or artillery, and that the IDF is checking with ground forces. However, it added that this could have been the result of Hamas fire as well. Relating to this attack, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken praised UNRWA's activity and condemned the attack against these shelters, stating the work that the UN is doing in Gaza saves lives. No one else can do it, and no one else is doing it. France also condemned the attack against UNRWA facilities. Other news relating to the humanitarian situation: hospitals in the Gaza Strip are reporting that much of the medical aid that is entering does not match the needs of the hospital, specifically noting that the hospitals are dealing almost exclusively with trauma victims and they are receiving a lot of medicines that don't match up to this. Relating to this, the Palestinian Health Ministry reported that the Al Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis is currently functioning at less than a minimal level, with no anesthesia materials or pain medications, an extreme lack of food, and that fuel is due to run out in the coming days. In addition to this, there are reports that evacuation orders were issued to different UN refugee camps in the Khan Yunis area after it was hit by different fire from the fighting. Thousands of Palestinians have been seen evacuating Khan Yunis towards Rafah and the Al Muasi refugee camp. Regarding the entrance of aid trucks, the IDF reported a total of 115 trucks carrying food, water, medical supplies, and shelter entered the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. 106 of these entered through the Rafah crossing, while again, protesters in Israel blocked the Kerem Shalom crossing, resulting in only 9 trucks were able to enter the Gaza Strip through the Kerem Shalom crossing. 115 trucks is over 100 less than the daily average that have been entering in the last week. According to reports, of these 115, only 22 trucks carrying food were able to enter the Gaza Strip. Moving on to the West Bank, IDF activity was reported in several different areas. In the Jenin refugee camp, substantial IDF activity, including engineering units, were noted throughout the city. The Wafa news agency reported substantial confrontations erupted that were spearheaded by a local organization calling itself the Jenin Brigades. The IDF reportedly disseminated soccer balls throughout the Jenin refugee camp as part of this operation, with pictures of Yahya Sinwar and the title "Criminal" above it. The Wafa network also released pictures showing these different soccer balls. 6 Palestinians were reported arrested in the Jenin refugee camp. Near Jenin refugee camp, in the Bir el Basha village, the IDF reportedly entered to arrest a Palestinian who was killed in a gun battle, and another who was arrested who was fighting with him. Local sources stated that the Palestinian who was killed, Wissam Hashan, is a known Al-Qassam operative. A total of 16 Palestinians were reported arrested throughout the West Bank in the last 24 hours. Political news related to the West Bank: the Israeli Ynet news agency quoted a senior security official in Israel talking about the West Bank, stating that there are elements within Israel's political system that are actively pushing the region towards a third intifada, possibly on purpose. He cited ministers' calls to dismantle the Palestinian Authority and to not allow Palestinian workers to enter Israel, noting that the exacerbating economic conditions in the West Bank are going to push the region to further and further escalations. Other news: Norway has officially begun to develop the mechanism for transferring the Palestinian Authority tax money that has been transferred by Israel. Reportedly, this is going to begin operating in the coming days. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon. There were continuous attacks from Lebanon targeting northern parts of Israel today. 2 attack drones crashed near the Kfar Blum area in the northern parts of Israel. Hezbollah later claimed that they were targeting an Iron Dome installation and that at least one of them hit their target. The IDF stated that no damage was caused by the drones. Hezbollah also published footage showing a missile hitting a radar station in the northern parts of Israel. The IDF also denied this as well. Those were the main attacks were reported today. Regarding IDF retaliations, the IDF reported that it attacked the Hezbollah airstrip in the Kilat Jabor area that is 20 kilometers north of the Israeli border. Warplanes also reported attacking Hezbollah air targets and structures in Sor and in Meira. The IDF reported that tanks and artillery attacked Hezbollah infrastructure in Tir Herfa, Ita Sha'ab, and at Daharia, and that warplanes also attacked infrastructure and lookout posts in the Kila village and Bleda as well. In addition, news sources in Lebanon reported that in the Kila village attack, a shopping center was completely destroyed. And then in addition, El Manar reported that warplanes attacked a house in the Al-Hiyam area and 1 person was injured. Political news: Lebanese Foreign Minister Abdallah Bo Habib stated in an interview today that Lebanon is willing to enter into negotiations with Israel to resolve all border disputes, and that these can be done under the auspices of UNIFIL, France, the United States, or others. He added, quoting, "If war does erupt, it will not come from Lebanon. Neither Hezbollah nor the Lebanese government want a war. We are talking about taking defensive actions rather than a war." He added, Lebanon wants to implement UN Security Council Resolution 1701, and he also stated that Hezbollah also has Lebanon's interests at heart, and it has no interest to escalate to war, and would rather support the border disputes being resolved and Israeli withdrawal from the points of contention. Moving on to the regional developments, in Iraq, the Islamic Resistance in Iraq militia, an affiliate of Iran, claimed an attack against a U.S. base near Erbil airport with drones. No other reports were made confirming this attack. However, these usually do come out 24 hours later, so we may learn about this tomorrow. Moving to the Yemeni front, a Houthi delegation arrived in Russia today and met with Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Bogdanov. This is the same Deputy Foreign Minister who has met with Hamas delegates since the war began. Houthi spokesperson stated that both sides condemned the attacks against Yemen and discussed how to pressure Israel and the United States to stop the war. Other news, the U.S. imposed sanctions on prominent Houthi figures today, and the United Kingdom is expected to do so in the coming days as well. Possibly related to this, the leader of the Houthis, Abdulmalik al-Houthi, stated today that since the war began, the organization has launched over 200 drones and 50 missiles, adding, and I quote, "Our struggle continues, and we will act until food and medicines reach the entire population of Gaza and the Israeli offensive ceases. We advise European states to use caution from U.S. involvement in their government and using their money. The implications of attacks will be negative for our enemies in costs, tensions, expanding the conflict, and threatening nautical activity." Moving on to some of the political and general trends from the last 24 hours. Ongoing protests were seen throughout Israel today as family members of hostages blocked main highways and continued to escalate their different protests. In addition, protests were also noted in the Gaza Strip as well. After a first such incident was reported yesterday in the Deir el-Balach area, today it was reported that hundreds of Palestinians protested throughout Khan Yunis with chants that among others stated, "Netanyahu and Sinwar, stop the war," i.e. calling both upon Israel and Hamas to stop the war. Other political news, the ICJ, International Court of Justice, is due to publish its ruling on Friday, in roughly 10 hours from now. The ruling is going to be about the injunctions that South Africa has requested. I mentioned yesterday the different options that the court may give. We'll learn about these in the coming hours. Relating to this, political meetings were held today in Israel under Netanyahu's auspices to formulate Israel's response to possible ICJ injunctions. According to the different reports, Israel is not going to abide by a ruling to stop the war if such a ruling would be given. I will add, even in Israel, there's a lot of suspicion that such a ruling will not be given. However, Israel is going to try to abide by the more likely injunctions which may relate to humanitarian aid. Relating to this, the New York Times reported today that as part of the ICJ case, Israel declassified over 30 secret orders given by political and military establishment and sent them to the ICJ as evidence as part of a bid to disprove allegations of genocide and demonstrate that regardless of the rhetoric used by top ministers, the actual actions Israel undertook involve sending aid to Gaza, sending fuel, water, and negotiating the establishment of field hospitals. The New York Times reportedly examined these documents and confirmed them. Other news, after the political upheaval started with the recording of Netanyahu stating a lot of allegations against Qatar that then brought about a Qatar response, then a response from Israel's finance minister, today family members of hostages stated that they did not record the call and were not allowed to bring phones or anything into their meeting with the prime minister, adding that the recording was likely done by Netanyahu's people. Addressing this, the military censorship in Israel was asked about blocking the publication, since it clearly does endanger Israeli security concerns, and reportedly, the military censorship had asked the Prime Minister's office whether to publish the leaks or not, and the Prime Minister's office, in fact, approved the military censor to publish these leaks. According to the families of hostages, this further substantiates that these were actually a strategy initiated by Prime Minister Netanyahu. Prime Minister Netanyahu denied this, again blaming the hostages' families for recording the meetings. Other news, Pramila Patten, who's the UN Special Envoy for Sexual Crimes, is due to arrive in Israel on Monday to begin investigations of sexual crimes that occurred on October 7th. Reportedly, she will visit the West Bank as well. Other political news, following the visit of U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to Israel several weeks ago, the U.S. reportedly established a special channel to communicate with Israel about cases in which the U.S. demands answers regarding civilian casualties in the Gaza Strip. According to reports, this special channel is a further indication of the U.S. frustration with Israel, and specifically the fact that the number of Palestinian casualties is not decreasing as the United States expected. Moving on to statements regarding the future of the Gaza Strip, today Aryeh Deri, the leader of Shas, was asked about Jewish settlements in the Gaza Strip in the future, and he stated, and I quote, "I want us to settle in Damascus too, but there's a government, a war cabinet, and an expanded cabinet who determine the aims of the war. What is not part of those aims is not worth discussing," i.e. stating people can make a lot of statements regarding who and where Israel will settle, but the fact is those are not aims of the war. And in another statement, Simcha Rotman, who is a member of religious Zionism, met with faculty and students of the Jewish Union in Yale University today. In this meeting he stated, quoting, "Israel and the world need to uproot the hope for a Palestinian state anywhere between the Jordan River and the sea. Today everyone knows that such a state will be a base for terrorism and more October 7th events. What we're seeing is that once again we're seeing a lot of rhetoric. However, there is no concrete, cohesive, and formulated answer in Israel what is going to be the future in the Gaza Strip." That is my report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.